We are definitely in the developing stages. We have been having professional development with reDesign. The first work that we did with them was really the discovery phase of us thinking through our core values, thinking through our project-based learning model, learning about competency-based education, and then thinking through what that could look like here.
Schools and leadership and teachers, every single person along the shift towards competency-based learning, they all need coaching and they all need constant support because we're undoing a lot of what traditional education has cemented in us as the right way of things. We need a lot more support in implementation. What does that look like in the classroom? How do I change my practice? And even like small levers that I could do tomorrow to bring about more competency-based learning in the classroom. What we have to keep doing is looking at the standards and making sure that the standards are things that you can measure through the question.
How can young people in Memphis?
I like how we have this, yes. How can young people in Memphis, yes.
Design solutions too, up to that point. Cohabitate on planet Earth in a way that is long-term and sustainable.
What will they learn in math and in science that will help drive this question? Like, what do they need to know to do that? I was gathered with a group of STEM teachers, both science and math. What we were doing was figuring out how to plan an entire project and how to do that in a way that actually facilitates co-teaching. And so the first step to doing that is creating like a robust problem question. And so that's what we did yesterday. We went through, everyone created their own problem question, and then looking at that problem question, how does that align to the standards that we're using?
So now that you're highlighting these, because you're saying that these are the ones we could do in this project, right? Give me some examples of how to do that through that question.
Crosstown has a set of competencies, and each of those competencies has sub-competencies or like threads to support that competency. And the thing about competency-based education is that the students have to show evidence of mastering a competency. And I can't show evidence unless you've actually created a project for me to show evidence that speaks directly back to a competency.
We're just now getting to the place where we're having richer conversations about, we have these competencies, we're using them on the surface level, but how do we really dig deep and effectively make this a part of the fabric of our school?
Right now, my focus is not on them assessing the competencies because I don't think they're there yet. Right now, my focus is on making sure that you know what the competencies mean and that you're using the language of the competencies in class and aligning those competencies to your project. A lot of times we get into the grading because it's like, well, how does that look? But that's like the tail wagging the dog.
We're trying to find language. This is not really, we're talking about the specific pieces and we haven't linked to competencies yet.
Okay.
So that's what we're...
Yeah, I think that's what we would have done once we come up with this kind of
That's
thing.
kind of what all of you guys are at, because it seems like we're comfortable with planning a project based
very
on
much so.
standards.
Yes.
We're not comfortable planning a project based on competencies.
What opportunity mapping is taking all the competencies and throwing them on the x-axis, taking all the projects and throwing them on the y-axis. And then the teachers go through and say, I'm covering this thread of this competency here. We look at that as a whole and say, okay, well, what's missing? What haven't we hit? What do we need to cover next session? What did we already cover? Well, did the students really grasp that, or do we need to go back and hit that again? And so that's the opportunity mapping, because we find the opportunities as opposed to the, gaps.
My first goal is always to develop, I think it's humanities, is to develop a project that they'll be interested in the first place. Like, if they're not interested in it, it might be full of competencies, but if they don't give a crap about it, I mean, what's the point?
Well, that's always the first step of teaching, is knowing your student.
Knowing your students.
So teachers across the board have to get together and go, what are we looking for? And directly connect that to a competency. But that actually kind of fleshes itself out when you're developing a project, so it works out for us. And that can be difficult. It requires a lot of what we call norming language.
And what we're norming is?
That's
the language.
The language.
How do we assess that myriad of possibilities with a rubric that works for all of us?
Yeah.
Looking at a specific assignment, so say a paragraph, what evidence is within that paragraph? What would we all rate that as? Like, would we call that proficient or developing, and why? Really driving back, just like we would the standards, but I think the language of the standards is embedded within the competencies. The process looks like a really intentional focus on that language and a really intentional focus on the evidence from the student work. That community assessment process, I think, is super important because I think it holds everyone accountable to say, we're not going to phone it in, we're going to really drive back to the evidence.
Not enough teachers, not enough school leaders get the support they need along the way in practice to change and to make those adjustments to really do personalized learning through competencies.
So I think that as a staff, as a faculty, we're kind of entering that conversation now about how do we get on the same page. When do we know when mastery has been achieved, So those are the challenges, and they're to be expected, but that's where we are right now.
We're going through this reflection phase of beyond the surface, how do we really ensure that this is a quality project where we're getting deeper learning, where we are addressing competencies and we're allowing students multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning, where it is personalized, so we're not delivering these blanket experiences, but we're really tailoring it to where students are. It's a really intense process with lots of wheels turning at the same time.